Chapter 21. Sheng Yuan Emperor was poisoned. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. As soon as the system finished speaking, boundless energy surged into Lin Ran's body. Dazzling rays of light burst in all directions, purifying everything around him. Amidst the murderous sword energy, there was an indescribable mysterious energy, like a clear spring slowly flowing down a mountain, making one feel refreshed. Lin Ran slowly opened his eyes and sensed the power flowing in his body. Using his finger as a sword, sharp sword energy flew out and sped towards the black and white sword. Boom! After a loud sound of explosion, the black and white sword still stood there safe and sound, as if nothing had changed. However, when Lin Ran reached out to touch it, the cold aura on the sword immediately dissipated and was replaced by an indescribable warmth. The evil aura around the sword was swept away. It had to be known that the evil aura had corroded the sword for a long time. Even with the suppression of righteousness, it could not be completely removed. Now, Lin Ran had dissipated the evil aura with just one move. It was obvious how powerful the new technique was. It actually has such a miraculous effect. Even Lin Ran was surprised by the effect of the exorcism sword energy. Not only could it remove the evil aura, but it could also remove all kinds of poison. With this technique, Lin Ran was practically immune to poisons. However, the sword could not return to its original state. Without the suppression of the evil aura, the sword was filled with righteousness only. After all, in the past, it was a battleground of the good and evil. Now, the good had claimed victory. It looked more like a Tai Chi 8 trigrams pattern that fused and complemented each other. Lin Ran looked at the black and white sword in his hand and put it back where it belonged. Over the past few days, Lin Ran had been practicing the exorcism sword energy. His level had increased from the first level of the senior grandmaster realm to the second level. Although it was only a small improvement, to others, it was more difficult to achieve than ascending to the heavens. Why haven't Zhao Wang and the other two made a move yet? Lin Ran looked into the distance. He could vaguely see carved beams and painted pillars. Even from afar, the buildings looked majestic and imposing. This was where the palace was. The Empress did not make a move either, nor did she mention what happened that day. Occasionally, she would come to Mount Sword to practice her swordsmanship, but she didn't summon Lin Ran. The two of them did not interact much. Lin Ran naturally would not take the initiative to approach the Empress and seek trouble. Maybe King Zhao's plan fell flat. On the other side, in the palace. In the magnificent hall, exquisite and luxurious items could be seen everywhere. The dragon-patterned incense burner was lifelike, giving off billows of smoke. It was 100-year-old agarwood that was worth 10,000 gold coins. It was said that this agarwood was extremely difficult to come by and preserve. It had a strange fragrance that could refresh the mind and brighten the eyes. Even though the sun was setting, night pearls of the East Sea was bright enough to light up the entire hall, making it look almost like daytime. Any item in the hall was worth more than what an ordinary person could earn in his entire life. It's time to eat, Your Majesty. Only then did Sheng Yuan Emperor put down the scroll in his hand and said, "Deliver the food then." As soon as he finished speaking, a large group of palace maids entered in an orderly manner. Clearly, they had been waiting outside for a long time. In just a moment, the long table was filled with delicacies. The food was delicious and appetizing, but Sheng Yuan Emperor wasn't moved. He had no appetite. The disaster in the southwest is getting worse by the day. It's making me worried sick. The eunuch supervisor couldn't help but advise, "Your Majesty, although state affairs are onerous, you should at least eat something to take care of your health." The young eunuch at the side immediately brought over the dishes. "Your Majesty, this is the latest medicinal cuisine developed by the imperial kitchen. It can nourish the spleen and body." The snow-white bird's nest was piled together like a snow mountain. On it were ginseng, deer antler, and other precious herbs, making it look especially mouth-watering. This dish looks quite interesting. It was sweet, but there was an imperceptible bitterness. Sheng Yuan Emperor thought that it was the taste brought about by the herbs, so he did not think too much of it and ate a few more spoonfuls. No one noticed the strange expression on the young eunuch's face. Sheng Yuan Emperor felt a burning sensation in his throat. Sensing that something was wrong with the food, he immediately knocked over the bowl. In the next second, he spat out a large mouthful of blood onto the snow-white bird's nest. It immediately shocked everyone. "Your Majesty, what's wrong?" Sheng Yuan Emperor's eyes darkened. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but blood spurted out like a fountain. The eunuchs and palace maids had never seen such a scene before. They immediately panicked. "Call the imperial physician immediately." At this moment, Sheng Yuan Emperor had already fainted. No one noticed that the young eunuch who recommended the dish was already nowhere to be seen. Upon hearing the news, the Prime Minister and a few other ministers rushed over. "What happened? How is His Majesty now?" Sun Zhonghong took a step forward and said with a worried expression. If Lin Ran was here, he would recognize this person as the one who conspired with King Zhao that day. He would definitely sigh at the fact that this wily old fox had two faces. At this moment, he was very sincere and looked genuinely worried. Chapter 22. Mastermind, inviting the sword god to come out. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The eunuch supervisor said with a trembling voice, "His Majesty vomited blood after eating the bird's nest." The imperial physician tested His Majesty and concluded that he was poisoned. After hearing what happened, Prime Minister Fu Sirui's expression turned extremely twisted with anger. Who is it that dares to poison the emperor? It's simply outrageous. After saying that, he looked fiercely at the eunuch supervisor and the others. You're getting better and better at your job. Did you even forget to test the food before handing it to His Majesty? Where did the young eunuch go? Find him even if you have to go to the ends of the earth. The eunuch's corpse was found at the back door of the imperial kitchen. He had been dead for a long time. The person who reported did not dare to look at Fu Sirui. Someone must have killed the young eunuch and used his identity to get close to the emperor, poisoned him, and snuck out of the palace during the chaotic scene. It seems like it was premeditated. When the imperial physician walked out, he was already covered in sweat. Looking at his face, everyone's hearts skipped a beat. Imperial Physician Zhang, how is His Majesty now? Imperial Physician Zhang shook his head with a solemn expression while wiping the sweat off his forehead. Once this poison takes effect, it will quickly infect the internal organs. Even a grandmaster won't be able to survive it. I've already used silver needles to block all the major acupoints on His Majesty, but it can only last for the time it takes to burn an incense stick. We have to find the person who poisoned His Majesty and get the antidote as soon as possible. Otherwise. Imperial Physician Zhang didn't finish, but everyone understood what he meant and was shocked. Is there no other way? Imperial Physician Zhang knelt on the ground. Please forgive me, Prime Minister. This time, I'm really out of my depths. The entire place fell silent, and no one dared to let out a sound. The eunuchs and palace maids were kneeling on the ground, trembling with fear. If anything happened to the emperor, they would probably be buried with him. It had to be known that Imperial Physician Zhang was the most experienced doctor in the imperial hospital. If he said so, it meant the emperor was really incurable. After all, even a grandmaster-level figure could not survive this poison. Fu Sirui's face darkened. Have you caught the murderer yet? No. What's the point of having guards like you? You can't even catch an assassin. Now, the entire palace was seamlessly guarded. Not even a fly could fly out, but the assassin managed to escape. The more Fu Sirui thought about it, the more shocked he was. To be able to avoid the imperial guards and secret guards, it seemed that the mastermind was very powerful. It was very likely that he was from the imperial court. Otherwise, why was he so familiar with the palace? It was even possible that there were people among the statesmen who helped the assassin escape. He looked around the place with an indescribable coldness. If the emperor died now, the heavenly saint dynasty would definitely be in turmoil. Who exactly wanted that to happen? Sun Zhonghong said coldly, "If His Majesty dies, your entire imperial hospital will be buried with him." Imperial physician Zhang's back was already drenched in cold sweat. Now the only silver lining is to find a senior grandmaster to treat His Majesty and stop the poison from spreading to his heart. This way, there might be a chance. Hearing that, not only was Fu Sirui not relieved, but he frowned even more. Across the dynasty, senior grandmasters were few and far between. Most of them were cultivating in seclusion in the depths of the mountains. It would be too late to send people to invite them to the palace now. Moreover, the senior grandmasters were mysterious. No one knew exactly where they were. At this moment, Sun Zhonghong added, "Isn't there one on Mount Sword?" "You mean the sword god?" Fu Sirui immediately revealed a conflicted expression. "But the sword god has been in seclusion for many years and hasn't appeared in the world. Besides, the former emperor gave the order that no one was to disturb him. It's an emergency. Now that His Majesty is in a life-and-death situation, we have no choice. I believe the sword god won't blame us." Sun Zhonghong's suggestion was also backed up by the other ministers. Without further ado, they quickly headed to Mount Sword. As a rule set up by the former emperor that anyone entering the forbidden area on Mount Sword would be punished by death, the ministers stopped at the gate and knelt down. "His Majesty is in danger of death. Sword God, please come out and save him." Everyone said in unison, but unfortunately, there was no reaction. There was no movement at the forbidden area. It was so quiet that it was as if no one was there. Could it be that the sword god is not in the mountain? The sword god has been in seclusion for decades. Chances are he might already be dead. Everyone whispered to each other and immediately panicked. The sword god was their last hope. It was clearly too late to invite other grandmasters. Fu Sirui kowtowed heavily and shouted again to the mountaintop, "His Majesty is in danger. Sword God, please do something to save him." At this moment, they still did not know that the sword god had died. No matter what they said and how much they kowtowed, the sword god didn't respond. Lin Ran was cultivating in the cave when he heard the noise outside. It seems like it was done by King Zhao and the others. Lin Ran decided to go out. Be it for the sake of the sword god or Taoistly, he had to save the empress. Moreover, if he could sign in at the throne hall, he might receive different rewards. Chapter 23. Sword God shows up. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Seeing that there was no response from Mount Sword, Fu Sirui's eyes were filled with despair. He sat on the ground dejectedly. Is the sword god really going to watch the emperor die? Unlike him, on Su Zhanhong's face, there was a smug smile. It seemed that they had guessed it right. The sword god was not on the mountain at all, or rather, he was already dead. Sun Zhanghong forced out tears and looked like he was in extreme grief. It had to be said that his acting skills were so excellent that even Lin Ran was amazed. Prime Minister Fu, you must have other ways. We don't have much time left. If the sword god doesn't make offer help, I'm afraid His Majesty will really. Fu Sirui choked with emotion. The expressions of the civil and military officials were equally solemn. They did not dare to imagine how much impact the death of the new emperor would have. Just as everyone was in despair, the situation suddenly changed. The ground shook violently. All the ministers stood up in shock and said in a panic, "What happened? Is there an earthquake? Run, there's going to be an earthquake." The violent trembling made everyone stagger. They could barely stand firm. Just as everyone was about to scurry away, one of the ministers looked like he had seen a ghost. Look! The swords on Mount Sword were jiggling violently, causing the entire mountain to shake. Clearly, it was the swords that shook the earth just now. They had never seen such a phenomenon before. Over the last century, Mount Sword had been tranquil, and nothing like that had ever happened. Everyone looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. One of the ministers couldn't help but mutter, "Are these swords crazy?" The commotion on Mount Sword quickly attracted the attention of the guards and martial artists in the palace. They all looked towards the direction of Mount Sword. The ministers weren't cultivating the martial Tao, so they naturally could not feel it. However, to the martial artists, even from such a long distance, they could feel a strong sword intent quickly spreading out from Mount Sword as the center. It was as if a huge mountain was pressing down on their heads. Everyone who was in the realm of martial master felt the pressure and revealed a panicked look. What powerful sword energy! Is the sword god really coming out of seclusion? I'm afraid it's true. Who else in the world has such a powerful sword energy other than the sword god? Everyone in the imperial city was inexplicably nervous. Many people revealed extremely reverent expressions. After so many years, the sword god has finally appeared again. Being able to see the sword god in person, I have no regrets in my life. After so many years, the image of the sword god in everyone's hearts was only magnified as time flew by. They had been looking forward to seeing the sword god descending on the mortal world again. On the other hand, those who were afraid of the sword god could not sit still. For example, Sun Zhonghong subconsciously clenched his fists to fight back the fear that was rising in him. Fu Sirui's eyes lit up with hope again. Is the sword god finally going to appear? 10,000 swords roared at the same time, and the sword intent that condensed seemed to be able to materialize. This magnificent scene shocked everyone. Facing the sword intent that covered the sky, they were awe-struck. People like Sun Zhonghong who had a guilty conscience were turning pale on their faces. Fortunately, in front of the imposing sword intent, it was only natural for one to get scared, so no one noticed anything strange about Sun Zhonghong. In the midst of countless sword beams, a figure slowly walked out of the forbidden area. Every step he took seemed to contain a huge force that shook everyone's hearts. What brought you all here to disturb my cultivation? The ministers stared at the person who was wrapped in black clothes and could not be seen clearly. In an instant, Mount Sword regained its tranquility. The divine swords were sentient. It was as if they had seen a king, they immediately stopped being restless. Similarly, the ministers didn't dare to breathe loudly. Fu Sirui felt his heart beating like a drum. No one would suspect the man's identity, let alone think that the sword god was Lin Ran in disguise. Lin Ran couldn't possibly tell everyone that the sword god had already died while suppressing the demon. If word got out, the entire heavenly saint dynasty would be in chaos. Now, he could only pretend to be the sword god for the time being. The sword god lived in seclusion to begin with, and very few people had seen his true appearance. Now that decades had passed, it was even more impossible for anyone to recognize him. With Lin Ran's current strength, it was easy for him to disguise as the sword god, and no one would suspect him. Sword god, please save his majesty. Fu Sirui was about to kneel down to Lin Ran when an invisible force kept him from bending his knees. Was this the power of the sword god? He was extremely shocked. Prime Minister Fu, there's no need to show manners. I already know. As expected, after Lin Ran showed them what he's capable of, no one doubted his identity as the sword god. Even if he had a mask on, they just thought that the sword god liked to remain mysterious. After all, senior grandmasters were always a little peculiar. Perhaps Sun Zhonghong was overthinking, but he felt that the sword god was looking at him with a sharp gaze that made him shiver. It was as if all schemes and plots were laid bare in front of him. No, the sword god had been in seclusion all this time. How could he know their plan? He was just scaring himself. Lin Ran summoned his spiritual sword, and a cold light flashed across the air. He rode on the sword and flew away. Looking at his departing figure, everyone felt like he was really a god descended from the heavens. Before anyone could react, Lin Ran was no longer in sight, leaving all of them dumbfounded on the spot. Chapter 24. Removing the Poison, Another Side of the Empress. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fu Sirui cried tears of joy. This is great. With the sword god's help, His Majesty will definitely be saved. In contrast, Sun Hongzhang gritted his teeth so hard that they were about to break. However, everyone's attention was on the sword god, so no one noticed his abnormal behavior. Sun Hongzhang took a deep breath. So what if he was the sword god? He was probably helpless about such a strange poison too. Even if the poison could be removed, it would at least consume half of his internal energy. When that happened, their plan could be carried out unobstructed. Thinking of this, he slowly revealed a smile and said, "Yes, the sword god is here. He must have a way to save His Majesty." No one knew that under the amiable face was a wild ambition. Lin Ran rode the sword into the palace without being stopped. Besides, no one was bold enough to stop him. Imperial Physician Zhang and the other imperial physicians were still on duty. They were all helpless mortals, including the eunuchs and palace maids. Looking at the arrival of the person on a sword, their knees uncontrollably went weak and they almost fell to the ground. They did not even dare to look Lin Ran in the eye. "All of you, get out. I'll treat His Majesty." Everyone felt relieved and fled like they were being chased by a ferocious beast. After walking out, they could finally take in fresh air and felt like they had come back to life. The sword god is really imposing and terrifying. He is so mysterious. I wonder what he looks like. Don't ever think about that. We are not qualified to see him unmasked. The bold palace maids began to discuss. On the other hand, Imperial Physician Zhang looked at the tightly shut door of the hall. He was still worried. After all, this was a rare poison. He wondered if the sword god could really remove the poison. The imperial physicians beside him were also worried. According to the sword god's current cultivation level and realm, I think removing the poison won't be an issue. I hope so. Heavens, you must bless our heavenly saint dynasty and keep His Majesty safe. Only Lin Ran and the unconscious Sheng Yuan Emperor were left in the huge palace hall. Looking at the person lying on the bed, without the deliberate disguise, her feminine features were more obvious, and her pale face made her look especially fragile. All the silver needles on her body were turning slightly black. When the silver needles were turned completely black by the poison, even God would not be able to save her. Fortunately, I came in time. I hope you won't forget about it upon waking up. Lin Ran thought of the exorcism sword energy he had obtained previously. It should be effective against the strange poison in the Empress body too. He quickly pulled out the silver needles from the Empress's body. At the same time, he circulated the sword energy in his body. With a slight flick of his fingertip, it was as if 10,000 swords were released at the same time, forming countless small air currents that blocked the various acupoints. When the silver needle dropped to the ground, the tip of the needle was glossy black. It went without saying how powerful the poison was. The sword energy flowed through the Empress's vessels and veins. Lin Ran could clearly see a black stream flowing on her fair skin. As if it was affected by the sword energy, it kept retreating. The movement of the bulk stream also affected the Empress. Her entire body trembled and her face turned pale. It was obvious that she was in pain. The person who poisoned her was really vicious. If it weren't for Lin Ran, the Empress would most likely end up dying. Looking at the unconscious Empress, Lin Ran said, "Sorry for being rude." He pulled open the Empress's clothes, revealing half of her shoulders. Her skin was as smooth as milk, and the scene was especially tempting. Lin Ran's eyes were fixed on the spot where the Empress's heart was. His fingers inevitably touched that soft spot and sank into it like it was cotton candy. Now that the Empress was in a critical condition, there was no choice but to be in physical contact with her skin for the treatment to be most effective. The light on his fingertips became even more dazzling as it shot into the Empress's body. In an instant, the black stream shrunk by half. Only a small portion of the black stream was still flowing about and resisting. When it was caught by the sword energy, it was devoured immediately. The sword energy was still lingering in the Empress's body, helping her recover better. After doing all of this, beads of sweat broke out on Lin Ran's forehead. Although he did not use much internal energy, removing poison required meticulous work and precise control of his strength. If he was not careful, the poison would spread and immediately corrode the heart. Fortunately, with Lin Ran's current cultivation, he could handle it. Cold, it's so cold. The Empress muttered unconsciously, her teeth chattering. Under the side effects of the poison, she felt abnormally cold all over her body, and she instinctively leaned towards the source of warmth beside her. It was as if there was a small stove beside her that was constantly emitting warmth. She let out a satisfied moan, but to Lin Ran, that moan sounded attractive. When the Empress wrapped her arms around his waist, his hand accidentally landed on the soft spot that was slightly warm. At this moment, Lin Ran was in an extremely awkward position. If the Empress found out about it, she would definitely cut him into pieces. With this thought in mind, Lin Ran slowly lowered his head and met her eyes. He stiffened and was struck dumb. Oh no! I'm done for. That was the first thought that came to mind. Chapter 25. It's not easy to be an emperor. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 25. It's not easy to be an emperor. The Empress did not make things difficult for him immediately. She just looked at him with red eyes. Coupled with her pale face, she looked like a kitten. In the next second, countless tears welled up in her beautiful eyes and streamed down her fair skin. Grandpa Sword God, I miss you so much. Lin Ran was stunned and at a loss. Did she mistake him for the Sword God? He took a closer look at the Empress and realized that although her eyes were open, her pupils were unfocused. Clearly, she was not completely awake. It was probably a side effect of the poison. The Empress hugged Lin Ran and no longer had her high and mighty look. She was like a fragile girl who had let down her guard and was crying. At the age of 20, she was supposed to be enjoying the best days of her life. However, she had to bear the fate of the entire Heavenly Saint dynasty and disguise herself as a man to prevent others from discovering his gender. It must be very tiring to be an empress. She was the ruler of the world with absolute power. Her life was supposed to be glamorous, but not exactly so. It was more like walking on a cliff. She had to be careful with every step. Otherwise, she would end up falling into the abyss and smashed to pieces. If her true gender was exposed, not to mention protecting the Heavenly Saint dynasty, she would probably not be able to protect her own life. Looking at the Empress, who was different from her usual self, Lin Ran patted her shoulder like he was putting a child to sleep. It's been hard on you all these years. These words were like a switch, causing the Empress to cry even louder. Her face was smudged by tears as she hugged Lin Ran tightly. Lin Ran could clearly feel the pair of soft breasts. They were as soft and elastic as jelly. Fortunately, Lin Ran had given the order that no one was to disturb him. Coupled with the fact that the hall was soundproof, there was no need to worry about being discovered. Grandpa Sword God, ever since I became the emperor, there have been endless internal and external troubles. The courtiers are plotting against me, and the vassals are eyeing me covetously. The martial world is preparing to take advantage of the chaos to get a share of the pie, but around me, there is no one whom I can trust. The Empress chattered on as if she had found an outlet to express the grievance that she had accumulated for years. When Lin Ran heard this, he was slightly shocked. It turned out that the Empress knew about the dangers in the imperial court all along. She was more perceptive and insightful than anyone could imagine. Even if she wanted to change, she didn't have the ability to do so. She had just ascended the throne and was surrounded by enemies. Besides, shaking up the imperial court wasn't something that could be done in a short time. To be able to make the late emperor break the tradition and make a woman the emperor, she must be truly capable. The only person I can somewhat trust is that mountain guardian. The Empress's voice snapped. Lin ran back to reality. But that guy is only good at dodging my attack and is too weak. However, he's quite tight-lipped and never said a word about my identity. I want to promote him and recruit him into my own forces, but I really don't know how. Hearing the Empress's opinion about him, Lin Ran did not know whether to laugh or cry. From the looks of it, the Empress seemed to have a pretty decent impression of him. Perhaps it was because the Empress was under tremendous pressure every day, but at this moment, she was crying like a river. There was nothing about her that looked like a high and mighty Empress. Lin Ran was probably the only person in this world who could have seen this side of her. She held Lin Ran tightly like a drowning person clutching at straws. Lin Ran felt that he couldn't continue to disguise as the sword god because this would only cause the Empress to believe she had the support of someone who had been gone for long. No matter what, she was the Empress and the ruler of the world, so she needed to rely on herself and be strong. Only by becoming stronger could she deal with all the internal and external difficulties. However, if Lin Ran didn't disguise, he wouldn't be able to explain himself. It was inevitable that the Empress would suspect him. Suddenly, an idea struck Lin Ran. Got it. My life is coming to an end. I can feel it's about time for me to go. Don't be sad. I'm happy that before I go, I can still save your life. From now on, you have to walk the path alone. Perhaps it will be difficult and dangerous, but I believe in your ability. You will definitely overcome all obstacles and lead the heavenly saint to another glory. Lin Ran was just making up some nonsense, but it had a huge impact on the Empress and would be a turning point in her life. From then on, the legend of Empress Sheng Yuan began. Just as Lin Ran had said, the Heavenly Saint dynasty reached an unprecedented glory. However, this was all in the future. That mountain guardian is kind and righteous. He has received my legacy and is considered my disciple. I entrusted him to protect you. If you encounter any difficulties, you can look for him. He's a trustworthy person. Lin Ran thought for a moment and added. This way, the Empress wouldn't suspect him in the future and he would have good reasons to leave the mountain. The Empress's breathing gradually became regular. Her long eyelashes were still wet with tears. They fluttered uneasily like a butterfly flapping its wings. Coupled with her messy hair and half-exposed shoulders, she was indescribably lovely. Lin Ran quickly helped tidy up her clothes. After all, should anyone see this scene, her identity would be exposed. Seeing that the Empress had fallen asleep, Lin Ran did not linger, in case she suddenly woke up. In order to prevent the Empress from thinking that what happened just now was an illusion, he specially left the broken sword of the sword god under the pillow before standing up to leave. This should be foolproof. When Lin Ran left, he was attracted by the throne hall. I've been in the palace for so long, but I haven't had the chance to look around. Since there was no one around, he decided to explore the palace. Chapter 26. Multiple layers of meaning to his words. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Everyone knew that the sword god was treating Sheng Yuan Emperor. The crowd nearby was dispersed so as to not disturb the treatment. Therefore, Lin Ran was not worried that someone would suddenly barge in. The throne hall was grand and majestic. It was decorated in gold and jade with coiling dragons sprawling out across the roof. There was a plaque hanging in the middle with the words, "Justice and Righteousness" engraved on it. It was written with vigorous strokes and obviously by a prestigious calligrapher. In particular, the dragon throne was made of pure gold. Lin Ran couldn't help but sigh. No wonder everyone wants to be the emperor and sit on the throne. I wonder what kind of effect signing in here will have. Lin Ran took out a sword and wiped it slowly. Congratulations to the host for successfully signing in and obtaining the 9 yin yang swords. As soon as the system finished speaking, golden light appeared on the throne room, forming a golden dragon that roared and surrounded Lin Ran. The more light that came out, the more corporeal the dragon. With eyes sparkling with divine light, it was no different from a real dragon. A dragon roar shook the hall, accompanied by a crisp phoenix cry. What immediately followed the cry was the appearance of a dazzling phoenix with gorgeous feather fluttering in the air. It was letting out rays of radiant lights that dimmed the throne hall. It seemed that with a gentle flap of its wings, the phoenix could send the entire world into shock. The dragon and phoenix stood by Lin Ran's side like guardians. They sang in union and danced around him, as if they were holding some kind of ritual. The others were naturally shocked by the special energy fluctuations coming from inside the hall, but they did not barge in. They thought that it was caused by the sword god while treating Sheng Yuan Emperor. After all, when the sword god came out of the forbidden area, the energy fluctuation he brought about was mind-blowing too. After an unknown period of time, everything finally returned to normal. Lin Ran slowly walked out of the throne hall. The ministers outside did not expect the treatment to finish so quickly. After all, this was a strange poison that even stumped the most experienced imperial physician. Fu Sirui quickly went forward and asked, "Sword God, how is His Majesty?" "Don't worry. He'll wake up after a short rest." Fu Sirui immediately cried tears of joy and almost knelt down to kowtow to Lin Ran again, but Lin Ran stopped him. "On behalf of the entire Heavenly Saint dynasty in His Majesty, thank you for offering help. It's fine. This is what I should do." Sun Jianhong stood by the side, rooted to the ground with his eyes wide open in disbelief. Didn't they say that it would cost at least half of the sword god's internal energy to remove the poison? It turned out removing the poison was just a piece of cake for him. To make sure the plan went smoothly and help the assassin sneak into the palace, Sun Jianhong had risked his own life and spent a lot of effort. Much to his disappointment, the poison wasn't as powerful as it was claimed to be. Sun Jianhong was really indignant. Perhaps because the look of disbelief on his face was too obvious, Lin Ran turned around and looked at Sun Jianhong. He said with a faint smile, "This minister doesn't seem to believe what I've done." Sun Jianhong was shocked and quickly lowered his head. "How would I dare to question you? I'm just too overcome with joy. Sword God is indeed extraordinary. God bless my emperor. Under the protection of the sword god, the Heavenly Saint dynasty will definitely prosper." The old man was quite good at bootlicking. However, Lin Ran did not buy it. Besides, he had seen the ambitious side of Sun Jianhong before. He said meaningfully, "If that's really what you think, it would be great." For some reason, Sun Jianhong felt that there were multiple layers of meaning to his words. His heart skipped a beat at the thought that the sword god seemed to know something. But how was that possible? Sun Jianhong said awkwardly, "Sword God, my loyalty to the dynasty is unquestionable. Their plot could be said to be flawless, and it was very confidential. Even the Heavenly Saint Emperor did not know about it, let alone the sword god who was in seclusion all year round." Lin Ran did not speak for a long time. He just stared at Sun Jianhong quietly and intently, making the atmosphere especially tense. Fu Sirui also smelled something strange going on. He looked at the sword god and then at Sun Jianhong. Cold sweat broke out on Sun Jianhong's back, almost drenching his clothes. He was terrified that the sword god would unsheath his sword and slash him in half. Fortunately, Lin Ran finally looked away and didn't say anything else, as if he was really just playing with him. Only then did Sun Jianhong heave a sigh of relief. After the sword god left, Fu Sirui said curiously, "What the sword god said just now was a little strange." Sun Jianhong forced a smile and changed the topic. "Let's go and see how His Majesty is doing first." Fortunately, the others did not suspect anything. After all, Sun Zhonghong had always been regarded as one of the most loyal and dedicated ministers. The Empress slowly opened her eyes and looked around, but there was no one around. I think I saw Grandpa Sword God. Was everything just a dream? At this moment, she felt that her body was unprecedentedly relaxed and her mind was clear. The sword energy not only helped her remove the poison, but it also cleansed her vessels and veins to a certain extent. The Empress was about to get out of bed when she saw something sticking out from under the pillow from the corner of her eye. Her eyes widened. This is Chapter 27. How could two women have a son? You are listening at novelfull.audio. What came into sight was a broken sword. The ruby on the hilt was like a red sun, emitting a dazzling light. Even if the sword was broken, one could tell that it had seen better days. A sharp sword intent swept past her face, telling her of its silent past. Even if it turned into ashes, the Empress would still recognize that this was the Sword God's sword, 10 miles dragon roar. It's Grandpa Sword God. What happened just now wasn't an illusion. The Empress stroked the dragon patterns on the sword. Tears fell from her face and dropped on the blade. The divine sword seemed to have sensed the Empress's sadness and buzzed. The Empress could see her teary face reflected on the shiny blade. Recalling what the Sword God had told her about his time running out, the Empress choked with sobs. From now on, I'm really alone in this world. The mountain that she had been relying on collapsed completely. Now, she was left alone to face the dangerous world. The Empress endured her grief and wiped her tears. After a moment, other than her eyes being a little red, she had already regained her usual calmness. She could not let outsiders discover anything. She had to pretend that the 10 miles Sword God was still around. Only then could she intimidate those who had evil intentions. Otherwise, those people would pounce at her like sharks that had smelled blood. Be it her or the Heavenly Saint dynasty, they would all be in danger. The Empress's gaze was firm. She knew that there was going to be a tough battle ahead of her. She said in a low voice, "Guard, how could she allow someone who wanted her to die in her cabinet? She had to find out who poisoned her." At the thought of this, a cold glint flashed across the Empress's eyes. Even after the poison in her body was gone, her face was still a little pale. At this moment, she had to show everyone who the owner of the dynasty was. On the other hand, after knowing that Xing Yuan Emperor had woken up, the ministers finally heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, with the Sword God's help this time, His Majesty was able to survive. As long as we have the protection of the Sword God, the Heavenly Saint dynasty will prosper. There were still a small number of ministers in the royal court who were loyal to the royal family and to Emperor Xing Yuan. For example, Prime Minister Fu Sirui. They felt that as long as the Sword God was still around, the Heavenly Saint dynasty could continue to be in peace. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the Sword God was the spiritual belief of the subjects in the entire Heavenly Saint dynasty. No wonder the Empress wanted to hide the news of the Sword God's death. If word got out, it would definitely cause unrest. On the other hand, Sun Zhonghong and his faction were a little exasperated. He lowered his voice and said, "Did you send someone to inform them?" Another minister nodded. King Zhao and Sect Master Zhou are already informed of what happened. The poisoner has already successfully left the palace. Don't worry, sir. Sun Zhonghong finally heaved a sigh of relief. As long as the poisoner wasn't caught, there would be no evidence pointing against him. That's good. Sun Zhonghong sneered. What kind of trash did Zhou Hao find? He claimed to be the #1 poison expert in the world. But look at what happened in the end. What a clown. At this point, he was furious. I spent a lot of resources, but in the end, both the Sword God and Emperor Xing Yuan were unscathed. It was simply a waste of my time. His face was as dark as a bottomless well as he said disdainfully, "That's how sects in the martial world are. They just can't do anything. All they know is to talk big. It's not all in vain. At the very least, we now know that the sword god is still around and is very powerful. It seems that the information is wrong. We need to rethink the plan. Sun Zhonghong nodded. Indeed, we have to postpone the execution. The ministers went in to greet Emperor Xing Yuan one after another. One of them was the Grand Secretary, the current Empress's father, Zhang Yueheng. Your Majesty, do you feel better? Thank you for your concern. Fortunately, with the help of the sword god, I was able to survive. Seeing that Zhang Yueheng wanted to say something, Emperor Xing Yuan gave the word. The rest of you all can leave. I have something to discuss with the Grand Secretary. After everyone left, Emperor Xing Yuan said, Father.in.law, we're in laws. There are no outsiders around now. If you have something to say, just say it. Emperor Xing Yuan was so respectful to Zhang Yueheng because he had served 3 previous emperors in this dynasty and had accumulated great power and influence. Many ministers in the imperial court were once his students. He was one of the people who helped Emperor Xing Yuan ascend the throne. If he didn't marry Zhang Yueheng's legitimate daughter, Zhang Yueheng would probably not side with him. Naturally, he had to rope in this kind of person. However, Zhang Yueheng, this old fox, didn't seem to want to invest everything he had in Emperor Xing Yuan. He had some other plans. Facing these wily people, Emperor Xing Yuan had to be fully prepared. Your Majesty, it's a blessing that you can fully recover, but this matter also gives us a reminder that we are in urgent need of a crown prince. If anything happens in the future, there will be someone to take your place and keep the situation under control. The smile on Emperor Xing Yuan's face gradually faded. He knew that this old fox was plotting something. Grand Secretary, what exactly do you mean? As expected, in the next second, Zhang Yueheng knelt on the ground. Even if what I'm going to say will make you displeased, I still feel obliged to say it. I hope that your Majesty can have a son with the Empress as soon as possible to stabilize the dynasty. That way, I can rest in peace. Emperor Xing Yuan was a little stunned. He did not expect Zhang Yueheng to bring this up. She was a woman, and so was the Empress. How could 2 women have a son? She wanted to shut these old ministers up with a crown prince, but the thing was that she did not have that ability. Chapter 28. Reproducing in place of the Empress. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Previously, a minister had brought this up once, but Emperor Xing Yuan used the excuse of being busy with state affairs to put off the matter. As if knowing what Emperor Xing Yuan was going to say, Zhang Yueheng immediately interrupted. Now that your Majesty has been on the throne for 2 years, logically speaking, the dynasty will be stable by now. It's time to consider the matter of having a crown prince. I know that your Majesty is industrious and rarely goes to the harem, but this is a matter that needs resolving sooner or later. That's not just what I think. It's what the other ministers think too. Zhang Yueheng gave Emperor Xing Yuan no room for negotiation. Apparently, the old fox couldn't wait to execute his plan. If the Empress gave birth to a son who was appointed as the crown prince, the next emperor would have the bloodline of the Zhang family. How glorious would that be? Having a crown prince grandson, Zhang Yueheng's power would be more stable. No one in the royal court could possibly challenge him. No wonder he was in such a hurry. Actually, I'm still young. It's still too early to consider having a crown prince. There's no need for you to be so worried about me, Grand Secretary. No matter what, he had to put off the matter for the time being. Otherwise, he would not be able to hide his gender at all. Without that function, how could he impregnate the Empress? However, it was clearly not going to be easy to get away with it this time. Your Majesty, may I ask what will happen in the future if something similar happens again? Emperor Xing Yuan was speechless. His eyes turned cold as he questioned, are you wishing me to die? I wouldn't dare. Zhang Yueheng knelt on the ground, looking like he was scared, but his expression was very calm. I'm just making a hypothesis. Besides, your majesty hasn't stepped into the harem for so long, so it's inevitable that people will talk about it and spread rumors. Your majesty, this won't be good for you and the stability of the dynasty. When he said the last sentence, Zhang Yueheng seemed to be threatening. Emperor Xing Yuan clenched his fists in anger, but there was nothing he could do. In short, I'm saying this for the sake of the dynasty. If your majesty can have a crown prince soon, I can rest in peace. I hope you can consider it carefully. After Zhang Yueheng left, Emperor Xing Yuan could no longer hold back his anger. This old fox. On the surface, he sounded like he's loyal, but in fact, he's just doing it for more power. It didn't seem like Zhang Yueheng would give up on his plan until he achieved his goal. There was even a hint of threat in his words. Given how many enemies I have internally and externally, I can't afford to fall out with him now. After all, Zhang Yueheng had a lot of power. If he stood against him, it would be like adding fuel to the fire and putting him in an even worse situation. However, the question was how in the world could he make the empress pregnant? Emperor Xing Yuan felt a headache coming on and couldn't help but sigh. What should I do? If someone can disguise as me, it might work. The key was that his identity was too special. Besides, this kind of thing was very risky. He had to find someone she could absolutely trust. For a moment, Emperor Xing Yuan was in a dilemma. He stroked the broken sword in his hand and seemed to have thought of something. His eyes lit up. Perhaps he can help me. Lin Ran was a little confused when he saw the Empress, who was supposed to be resting to recover, suddenly appear in the forbidden area of Mount Sword in a casual outfit. Why did the Empress want to see him as soon as she woke up? Could it be that she knew he was disguising as the Sword God? Or was there another reason? Greetings, Your Majesty. Unlike the past, the Empress smiled faintly and wasn't as high and mighty as she normally looked. Please get up. I already know your identity. You are young and promising and have obtained the legacy of the Sword God. Your future will definitely be bright. From the looks of it, she probably believed what the Sword God said and knew that Lin Ran was a trustworthy person. Lin Ran couldn't help but praise himself for making a brilliant move. The Empress went straight to the point. I'm looking for you today because I want to entrust an important task to you. Your Majesty, feel free to tell me. I'll do anything for you even if I have to go through hell. There's no need to go through hell. I just need to borrow something from you. After the Empress finished speaking, Lin Ran was completely dumbfounded. He almost thought that the Empress was joking with him. After transmigrating and being reborn, he had seen all kinds of mind-blowing things, but what he heard just now blew his mind more than anything else. He had never heard of such a request. He asked in disbelief, "You mean you want me to have children with the Empress in your place?" The Empress nodded. Lin Ran calmed down after a moment. After all, Emperor Xing Yuan was also a woman. The Empress looked helpless. I really have no choice. The Grand Secretary is pressing me very hard. If I don't do as he says, the situation in the royal court will become even more disadvantageous for me. He might even suspect me. I've been married to the Empress for many years, but I've never touched her. I think the Grand Secretary has already been suspecting and wants to take this opportunity to try me. Now, you're the only one who can help me. After thinking about it, the Empress felt most at ease leaving this matter to Lin Ran. After all, the Sword God said he could be trusted. The Sword God's judgment of people was never wrong. If Lin Ran was a greedy and evil person, the Sword God wouldn't think so highly of him. The Empress didn't know that the previous Sword God was just Lin Ran in disguise. Chapter 29. A Night of Love is worth 10,000 gold coins. You're listening at novelfull.audio. No, I can't agree to that. Lin Ran's first reaction was to refuse. This was too ridiculous. The Empress was also surprised by Lin Ran's reaction. If ordinary people knew that they were going to have children with the current empress, they would be wild with joy. However, other than a moment of shock, Lin Ran was calm and unmoved. It had to be stressed that it was a great honor to be in skin-to-skin contact with the high and mighty empress, and potentially, their son could be the future crown prince. The empress was even more satisfied. As expected of someone trusted by the sword god. His character was indeed trustworthy. Hence, she was more determined that Lin Ran was the most suitable candidate. Master Lin, I know you're in a difficult position, but please help me for the sake of the sword god. I'll definitely repay your kindness in the future. You don't want to see my identity exposed and the heavenly saint fall into chaos, right? Seeing that the empress was pleading sincerely, Lin Ran couldn't bring himself to reject her. It's just that, seeing that he was budging, the empress was delighted and persuaded more enthusiastically. Master Lin, don't worry. You just have to go in and do your job and leave the rest to me. I guarantee that there won't be any danger and no one will find out about it. Only then did Lin Ran agree reluctantly. Alright then. If others knew this, they would definitely think Lin Ran was the luckiest man in this world. The empress was overjoyed. Then we have a deal. I'll send someone to inform you tonight. This is a human skin mask. Wear this when the time comes. She did not linger and went straight back to make the arrangement. After all, this was a big matter and she could not afford to make any mistakes. There would definitely be Zhang Yueheng's spies watching her in the dark. She had to do it flawlessly. At night, the two of them secretly changed their identities. The person who entered the Empress's chamber was Lin Ran, who disguised himself as Emperor Xingyuan. According to Emperor Xingyuan's description, the light in the Empress's chamber was very dim, so it was very difficult to see the face clearly. The dark environment did not affect Lin Ran's vision. He could clearly see the beauty lying on the bed. She was exquisite and graceful. The gauze curtain was half covered, making the vibe especially exciting. One could vaguely see the Empress's exquisite facial features and small lips. They were like cherries hanging on a branch, ripe and juicy, making one want to pick them. She was undoubtedly a beauty. Your Majesty, this voice was like a bird singing in the valley. It was indescribably sweet, but it also carried a hint of caution and nervousness. Lin Ran lifted the curtain. As expected, the beauty in front of him was as beautiful as a blooming rose. Why are you looking at me like that, Your Majesty? Perhaps because his gaze was too passionate and intent, the Empress became shy. She lowered her head sheepishly, and a faint blush spread across her fair skin. Zhang Qingya was a little uneasy. After all, the Emperor had never touched her since the wedding. At first, she thought that she had done something wrong and angered the Emperor so that the Emperor stopped coming to see her. Fortunately, the good news was that the other concubines were treated the same. Otherwise, she would be made a laughing stock in the harem. Now that the day she had been waiting finally came, she wanted to seize it and enchant this young emperor. She suppressed the shyness in her heart and slowly leaned towards him. Lin Ran did not expect the Empress to take initiative. Your Majesty, let me serve you. The Empress wrapped her arms around him like a snake as she groped around his body with her slender hands. Looking at her clumsy movements, Lin Ran grabbed her soft hands, and his gaze gradually became dangerous. Do you know how? Zhang Qingya looked up and was instantly stunned on the spot when her gaze met that pair of mysterious and unfathomable eyes. She felt that Emperor Xingyuan was a little different tonight, but she couldn't tell the difference. They clearly looked the same, but their auras were different. His gaze was invasive, filled with indescribable danger as well as mystery. She could not help but be attracted to him. Lin Ran ran his hot palm over her delicate body and unleashed the snow-white dough with a red bean on it. It was so big that even Lin Ran couldn't wrap it entirely in his hand. He played with the red bean and rubbed it slowly and gently. Arg, Zhang Qingya had never had such an experience before. She immediately let out moans that were getting louder and louder. Your Majesty, arg, all the moans were blocked from coming out as Lin Ran sealed her lips, leaving only the sound of lip-smacking. At this moment, the noble empress was controlled by Lin Ran. Her eyes were unfocused, and there was shiny saliva oozing out of the corner of her mouth. On the other hand, Lin Ran was extremely calm and unmoved, as if nothing could stir his heart. The cultivation technique of the 9 yin-yang swords circulated in his body. As he entered and exited, an invisible stream of air emitted from the empress. Her originally snow-white skin was gradually dyed with the color of lust, like a slowly blooming flower. The nectar that seeped out of her body was tempting people to explore the mysterious flower path within her. Chapter 30. The power of the 9 yin-yang swords, 9th level of the Senior Grandmaster realm. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The so-called called 9 yin-yang swords was actually a way to collect yin to replenish yang in order to increase Lin Ran's strength quickly without any side effects. The Empress was red all over her body. She felt that her body was heating up, forcing her to find a way to quench it. The coldness Sheng Yuan Emperor gave off was like ice in the summer, making her want to get closer to him. She was like a traveler walking in the desert who had finally found the oasis. She could not help but blush and moan. It was only until the latter half of the night did they stop. There was yin and yang in the world, and it was only right for yin and yang to intertwine. At this moment, under Lin Ran's continuous banging, the Empress was completely out of her mind. She was dizzy and her jade-like body was clinging to his, swaying like a lone boat in the vast sea. If she could open her eyes, she would definitely discover that everything around her was filled with indescribable sword intent. However, at the center, they weren't affected at all. After an unknown period of time, Lin Ran finally withdrew. He looked at the Empress, who was lying weakly on the bed. Her cheeks were red like ripe peaches, and the air was filled with sweetness. Before dawn, Lin Ran changed his identity back with Emperor Sheng Yuan without being noticed. The next day, the Empress appeared with a radiant smile. The concubines greeted her. Looking at the Empress's glowy face, they were so jealous that the handkerchief in their hands was almost torn. Why did the Emperor only visit the Empress? Why were they neglected? In recent years, because Emperor Sheng Yuan had never stepped into the harem, rumors had already spread that he was impotent. Now that the rumors were debunked, how could these consorts sit still? Lin Ran thought that this matter would be over. Unexpectedly, Empress Sheng Yuan came looking for him again. What? Are you saying that there are other consorts? Do you really treat me as a stallion who can go on spreading seeds non-stop? He couldn't help but complain. Good Lord, if this continued, he would die of exhaustion. The Empress looked helpless. Since the Empress has been satisfied, the other consorts can't be neglected, right? These days, they've been trying their best to create opportunities to see me. They've been giving me tonic soup and singing and dancing for me. I'm so annoyed. After getting to know Lin Ran for the past few days, the Empress did not put on any airs. She gradually opened her heart to him and complained to him about the annoying trivial stuff in her life. Lin Ran couldn't help but want to laugh when he heard that. He teased, "It seems like you've been quite lucky with women recently." The Empress teased back. "Aren't you the one who gets everything? I heard that when the Empress walked out of her chamber, she had to hold the wall because her legs were trembling." After saying that, she looked Lin Ran up and down and said meaningfully, "I really didn't expect you to be so good at that." Lin Ran's smile immediately froze. "Just help me until the end. Otherwise, I'll really be pestered to death by those consorts. Moreover, if I don't take good care of them, I'm afraid the forces behind those consorts will probably be displeased at me for showing bias." At that time, in order to successfully ascend the throne, Emperor Sheng Yuan took in consorts from influential families. Fortunately, she was a woman, so there were not many consorts. Otherwise, Lin Ran would die like an overworked cow. Because the Empress was persistent, Lin Ran had no choice but to agree. From then on, his peaceful cultivation days were disrupted. At night, Lin Ran would disguise as Emperor Xing Yuan and have fun in the harem. During the day, he would cultivate like a conch without stopping. However, the benefits were considerable. Every time he was doing that kind of thing, Lin Ran would use the 9 yin yang swords. This method was different from those unorthodox methods. Not only could Lin Ran's strength increase, but it was also very beneficial to these consorts. These sword energies had already been transformed, so even if the consorts weren't in the martial Tao, they wouldn't be hurt by it. On the contrary, because of Lin Ran's nourishing them, their skin became fairer and smoother, and their overall health also improved. However, this was not obvious in the short term. In the forbidden area of Mount Sword, Lin Ran sat cross-legged as he focused on cultivating, digesting the power he had obtained through the 9 yin yang swords. Over the past few days, he finally managed to give every consort the care and attention they deserved. Fortunately, Lin Ran was different from ordinary people and had the support of the formless sword body. Otherwise, he would really die of exhaustion. A stream of air was slowly flowing in his veins and vessels. It was like a stone suddenly being thrown into a calm lake, causing a huge splash. A bright sun slowly rose, bringing with it a heat that could burn all living things. At this moment, Lin Ran's entire body was red through and through like a cooked prawn. Violent energy surged through his body. If not for the fact that he had the sword body, he wouldn't be able to withstand such enormous energy. At the critical moment, the silver moon rose and hung high in the sky, scattering a cold light that dispelled the heat brought by the sun. The originally restless energy was also appeased. The sun and the moon, both representing the yang and the yin, were in front of Lin Ran. The sun and moon were close to each other, forming a strange scene. They seemed to be opposing each other, but in fact, they complemented each other. As they fused with each other, Lin Ran's level continued to rise. 4th level of the Senior Grandmaster Realm. 5th level. 9th level of the Senior Grandmaster Realm. It only stopped when he reached the 9th level of the Senior Grandmaster Realm.